In the hours after Korra Stoneblood's death, his conspiracy collapsed like a house built on sand. The evidence in Kethvara's hilt led to arrests across the fleet. Dozens of officers who had helped the admiral sell their people's secrets to the Hollow Swarm military positions were changed, defensive networks rebuilt, and the gaps that had allowed enemy forces to consume 3 Valdrani colonies were finally closed. Jinho spent those hours in a medical facility while Valdrani doctors worked to repair the damage the duel had done to his body. They had never treated a human before, and approached the task with the same seriousness they would have given to one of their own warriors by the time he was able to walk again. The political situation had shifted completely. He was summoned to the council chambers once more. But this time, there were no armed guards surrounding him. Instead, Valdrani citizens lined the streets to watch him pass, their golden eyes tracking him with expressions he was only beginning to understand. The High Council was waiting for him in full assembly. All 12 seats filled. Matriarch Vorna occupied the central position as before. But something in her ancient face had changed. She looked at him now not as an intruder, but as something else entirely. "Park Jinho of Earth," she said, and her voice carried the weight of formal ceremony. "You have fulfilled the burden of the fallen." "I have," he agreed. "Commander Yara Stormhold's final wish has been honored, and her betrayer has faced justice. Then by our oldest laws, your obligation is complete." Vorna gestured toward the sword at his side. "Kethvara should be returned to the Stormhold family archives, there to rest until a new generation claims it." Jinho reached down to unbuckle the harness that held the massive blade. He had been carrying it for days now, and despite its weight, it had begun to feel like part of him. He lifted it free and stepped forward to place it in Vorna's weighing hands. The sword did not move. He pulled harder, but Kethvara remained fixed at his side, as if welded to the harness. The council members exchanged glances, and Vorna's eyes widened slightly. "Try again," she said. Jinho tried. He used both hands, bracing himself against the floor, but the sword simply would not leave him. It pulsed with warmth against his hip, and he felt something like amusement flowing through the bond they shared. "It will not release," he said finally. "I do not understand why." Vorna stepped down from her seat and approached him. Her ancient form still towering over his human frame, she reached out and touched the blade's hilt with one gnarled finger a moment. "Past, the sword has chosen," she said, softly, "truly and completely chosen." She looked at the other council members. "This has not happened since the founding wars, when Valdrani blades chose their first wielders from among our ancestors." "What does it mean?" Jinho asked. "It means Kethvara is yours," Vorna replied. "Not borrowed, not temporarily carried, but yours." She studied his face with those golden eyes that had seen centuries pass. "You are not just a messenger who fulfilled a duty. Human." She stepped back and raised her voice so all could hear. "The blade has claimed you as one of our own." The council chamber erupted in whispered conversation, some members protesting while others nodded in acceptance. Sarna silenced them with a gesture. "I would speak with him alone," she said. "Clear the chamber." When the others had gone, Vorna lowered herself to sit on the steps before her seat, bringing her face closer to Jinho's level. "Tell me," she said quietly, "what were Commander Stormhold's final words to you?" Jinho thought back to that dark corridor on Kethros 4, to the dying giant who had trusted him with everything she had. "She laughed," he said, "when I took the sword. When I promised to bring it here, she laughed." "Why do you think she laughed?" "At first I thought it was bitterness or despair." Jinho shook his head. "But it was not. What was it then?" "Joy," he said. "She laughed because she knew, even as she was dying, that she had found the right person." He touched the sword at his side. "She laughed because she could see what would happen. Somehow, and it made her happy." Vorna smiled. And the expression transformed her stern face into something almost warm. The ceremonial blades carry echoes of all who have wielded them. She said, Yara Stormhold's spirit is part of Kethvara now. And she chose you before the sword did. The ancient matriarch rose to her full height. You will be granted a title never before given to an outsider, she announced. From this day forward, you are Kethvaran, the swordbound, brother to the Valdrani in all ways that matter. She placed one massive hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. Go back to your people, Jinho, and know that you are always welcome among us. Jinho left Keth Prime 2 days later, his ship escorted by an honor guard of Valdrani cruisers until he crossed out of their space. The story of what he had done spread faster than light speed, carried by travelers and traders to every corner of the galaxy when other species asked how a human had defeated a Valdrani admiral in single combat. The giants told the tale with pride in their voices. He was small, they would say, fragile and soft, barely reaching the height of our children. He should have died a dozen times in that arena, but he carried the blade of Yara Stormhold, and her laughter lived in him. He fought not like a Valdrani but like a human, dirty and unpredictable and absolutely refusing to fall. And when the admiral made his final mistake, the human was there to end him. The story became legend, and the legend became a lesson that spread throughout the stars too. Not underestimate humans. They're small and weak by galactic standards, short-lived and fragile compared to the elder races, but there is something in them that refuses to accept impossible odds. Something that laughs in the face of death and finds a way to win anyway. That is the human gift. And it is more dangerous than any weapon. Jinho returned to his salvage work, flying the persistent fool through dangerous space and taking jobs that others would not touch. But Kethvara hung above his bed now, glowing faintly in the darkness of his cabin. And sometimes late at night, he swore he could hear laughter. It was not a mocking sound or a sad one. It was the laughter of a warrior who had chosen well and knew it. It was Yara Stormhold, proud of what her faith had created, joyful at the legend her death had spawned. It was the laughter of giants, echoing through the stars wherever the story was told, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space. Whenever a human stood against impossible odds and refused to surrender, that laughter grew a little louder. Yara had seen something in him that day on Kethros 4. Something worth dying for. She had placed her faith in a species that the galaxy had always dismissed as too small and too weak to matter. She had laughed her last breath, because she knew, with absolute certainty, that her faith was justified. Park Jinho touched the sword above his bed and smiled. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness. The blade pulsed warm beneath his fingers, and somewhere beyond the edge of hearing, a giant laughed with joy. The story was not over, it was only beginning. The arena of ancestors was older than human civilization. Its walls were carved from the bones of mountains, and its floor was stained with the blood of countless warriors who had fought and died on its ancient stones on this morning. Every seat was filled. Tens of thousands of Valdrani had come to watch, their massive forms packed together in tears that rose toward the pale sky. They had come to see a human die. Word had spread through the night of the impossible challenge, and by dawn the arena could not hold all who wished to witness this spectacle. Screens broadcast the event to billions across Valdrani space, all of them watching the tiny figure who walked onto the fighting floor carrying a sword too large for him. Jinho had not slept. He had spent the night letting the sword show him everything it could, absorbing the memories and instincts of 17 generations of warriors. It was not enough to make him their equal, but it was enough to make him more than he had been. He understood now how Yara would have moved, how she would have thought, how she would have fought. A sword could not give him her strength or her size, but it could give him her spirit. Korath Stoneblood entered from the opposite side of the arena. And the crowd roared. He wore full ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished gold. And he carried a blade even larger than Kethvora, a weapon that had taken the lives of over 300 opponents in formal combat. He raised it high, and the crowd roared again. Jinho stood quietly and waited. Matriarch Vorna descended from the council box to stand between them. "This is a trial by combat," she announced, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the arena. "It will end when one combatant yields or dies." She looked at Jinho. "Do you understand, human?" "I understand," he replied. "Do you wish to yield now and accept judgment for false accusation?" "I do not," Korath laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the ancient walls. "Then let us begin." "Little creature." He dropped into a fighting stance. "I will try to make this quick." Vorna stepped back, and the duel began. Korath attacked immediately, his massive blade sweeping down in an arc that could have split a vehicle in half. Jinho threw himself sideways, rolling across the stone floor, and the blade struck sparks where he had been standing. He came up running, not toward Korath but away, circling to keep distance between them. The crowd jeered. They had come to see blood, not a human running like Praekorath pursued with contemptuous ease. Each of his strides covering 3 of Jinho's second strike came from the side, and Jinho barely got Kethvora up in time to deflect it. The impact sent him skidding across the floor, his arms numb from the force. "Is this the champion the blade chose?" Korath mocked. "A creature who cannot even stand against one blow?" He attacked again, and this time his blade found flesh. A shallow cut opened across Jinho's shoulder, and the crowd cheered at the sight of red blood on the ancient stones. Jinho kept moving, kept circling, kept refusing to stand and fight like a proper warrior. 2 more cuts followed, one across his thigh and one along his ribs, each one drawing more blood and more cheers from the watching giants. But Jinho noticed something as the fight continued. Korath was getting frustrated. He had expected this to be over in seconds, a quick execution to cement his reputation, and instead this human kept slipping away, kept refusing to die properly. His attacks were becoming wider, more aggressive, less controlled. "Stand and fight," Korath snarled. "Face your death with honor." "Honor?" Jinho gasped, using the moment to catch his breath. "You speak of honor after selling your own people to the Swarm?" Korath's face twisted with rage, and he charged. This time, Jinho did not run. He watched the massive blade descending, and at the last possible moment, stepped forward instead of back. The blow passed over his head, so close he felt the wind of it, and suddenly he was inside Korath's guard. Kethvora moved almost on its own, guided by memories that were not his, and bit deep into the Admiral's left leg. Voldrani blood, dark as old copper, sprayed across the stones. Korath bellowed in pain and surprise. Stumbling back, the crowd went silent. Human had wounded a Voldrani Admiral in single combat. Such a thing had not happened in living memory. "You are fast," Korath admitted, limping slightly on his injured leg. "But speed means nothing against strength." He attacked again, and the duel resumed with new intensity. Jinho was bleeding from 6 wounds now, and each one sapped his strength, but he kept moving, kept watching, kept waiting for Korath to make another mistake. The sword fed him impressions of Yura's fury, her determination, her absolute refusal to surrender. Even as she lay dying, he drew on that fury and made it his own. Korath overextended on a thrust, leaving his right side open, and Jinho struck another wound, this one across the Admiral's arm, deep enough to weaken his grip. The crowd's silence had turned to murmuring, a sound of confusion and growing amazement. This was not how it was supposed to go. Korath was supposed to kill the human in seconds and restore his honor. Instead, he was bleeding, limping, and facing an opponent who simply would not fall. "What are you?" Korath demanded. Genuine bewilderment mixing with his rag. Jinho smiled through the blood on his face. "I am what your victim chose," he said. "I am what you underestimated." He raised Kethvora, and the blade began to glow again, brighter than before. "I am human." Kara screamed and launched his final attack, putting everything into one massive blow that would end this embarrassment once and for all. It was exactly what Jinho had been waiting for. He stepped into the strike instead of away from it, moving inside the arc of the blade before it could build momentum. Karath's sword passed harmlessly behind him. Kethvara did not miss. Glowing blade found the gap in Karath's armor, sliding between the plates to pierce his chest. The Admiral's eyes went wide with shock. He looked down at the sword buried in his body, at the small human hand holding it, and then up at Jinho's face. "How?" he whispered. "She laughed when she died," Jinho said quietly. "Commander Stormhold laughed because she knew you would underestimate whoever came for you." He met Karith's golden eyes without hatred, only the cold satisfaction of duty fulfilled. That is what humans do. "Admiral," he twisted the blade, "we get underestimated, and then we win." Kara Stoneblood fell. His massive body crashed to the arena floor with a sound like thunder. And then there was only silence. Jinho stood over the fallen admiral, covered in blood, both human and Voldrani, still holding the sword that had chosen him. Slowly, impossibly, a sound began to rise from the crowd. It was not cheering. Not exactly. It was something older, something more primal. It was acknowledgement. Tens of thousands of Voldrani voices rose in the ancient cry of respect for a warrior who had proven themselves against all odds. They had come to watch a human die. Instead, they had witnessed something they would tell their children about for generations. Jinna let the sound wash over him and felt Kethvora pulse with warmth in his hand. Somewhere he knew Yara Stormhold was laughing again. The landing platform on Keth Prime was designed for Valdrani ships, which meant Jinho's vessel looked like a toy sitting among war cruisers. He stepped out into air that was thinner than Earth standard and gravity that was slightly heavier, making every step feel like walking through water. Around him stood a ring of Valdrani warriors in full ceremonial armor, each one towering over him like living statues of bronze and gold. None of them spoke. They simply stared at this tiny creature who dared to walk their sacred ground carrying one of their blades. Jinho kept Kethvora strapped across his back where they could all see it. The sword was almost as tall as he was, and carrying it required a special harness he had rigged during the journey. It looked ridiculous, he knew. A human struggling under the weight of a giant's weapon. But the blade itself was not mocking him. It pulsed with steady warmth against his spine, lending him strength he did not know he had. "Follow," commanded the largest of the warriors. And Jinho followed. They led him through streets built for beings 3 times his size. Stairs were so tall he had to climb them like ladders, and the doors required 2 hands to push open. Every Valdrani they passed stopped to stare, their golden eyes tracking the impossible sight of a human bearing sacred steel. Some looked furious, others looked confused. A few, mostly the older ones, looked at him with something approaching curiosity. The council chambers were located in the heart of the capital city, a massive structure of dark stone and gleaming metal that had stood for 6,000 years inside. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into shadow, and the seats of the council members were arranged in a semicircle that could hold 100 giants today. Only 12 seats were filled. The High Council itself, the ruling body of the entire Valdrani civilization. Jinho walked into the center of the chamber and stopped. He could feel their attention like physical weight pressing down on him. "You are the human," said the figure in the central seat, an ancient Valdrani woman whose bronze skin had faded to gray with age. "I am Matriarch Vorna Deeproot, eldest of the council." Her golden eyes studied him without expression. "Explain yourself." Jinho unstrapped the sword from his back and held it before him. 3 days ago, I found the crashed vessel of Commander Yara Stormhold on the moon of Kethrus 4. His voice echoed in the vast chamber. She was dying. Betrayed by ships from her own fleet, a murmur ran through the council. Before she died, she gave me this blade and charged me with a duty. Jinho continued. She asked me to bring evidence of treason to this council and to see justice done. Treason? Vorna leaned forward. Explain. Admiral Korath Stoneblood has been selling Valderani military positions to the Hollow Swarm for years. The murmur became a roar. Several council members rose from their seats in outrage. And Jinho was not sure if the anger was directed at the accusation or at him for making it. Lies, thundered a voice from the side of the chamber. Jinho turned to see a massive Voldrani male striding toward him, his golden eyes blazing with fury. This was Korath Stoneblood, and he was even larger than Soyen had described. Nearly 4 meters of muscle and scarred bronze skin. This creature speaks lies fed to him by enemies of our people. Korath declared. Commander Stormhold was a traitor who fled justice, and this human is her puppet. The evidence is in the sword, Jinho said, refusing to back down, even as the Admiral loomed over him. Recordings of transmissions between Korath and Hollow Swarm agents, military codes that were sold, coordinates of colonies that fell because of his betrayal. He looked up at the giant without flinching. Play them and see the truth, Vorna gestured. And a technician came forward to examine the sword's hilt. The data crystal was removed and connected to the chamber's display systems for the next hour. The council watched in silence as transmission after transmission played across the screens. They heard Korath's voice negotiating with creatures that had consumed entire worlds. They saw the payment records, the stolen codes, the death sentences he had passed on his own people for profit when it was finished. The chamber was utterly still. Korath's face had gone from bronze to ashen gray. Fabrications, he said. But his voice had lost its thunder. Clever forgeries created by... Enough. Vorna cut him off. Her ancient eyes were cold as she looked at the Admiral. The evidence speaks clearly, but you have the right to contest it. She turned to Jinho. And you, human, have made a grave accusation against one of our highest officers. I have stated the truth that Commander Yara Stormhold died to deliver. Jinho replied. Her final wish was for justice, and I carry that wish until it is fulfilled. Then let justice be served in the old way, Korath said. And there was something like triumph returning to his voice. I invoke my right as the accused. He smiled down at Jinho. Trial by combat. Another murmur swept through the council, but this one had a different tone. Several members looked almost pitying as they gazed at the small human. The burden of the fallen grants him the rights of a blade carrier, one of them said. He cannot. Refuse. Vorna nodded slowly. Human, you have heard the challenge. Her eyes studied his face. If you are truly carrying the burden, you must accept or forfeit your accusation and your life. Jinho looked at Korath Stoneblood. This mountain of a warrior who had killed champions from a dozen species. He thought about Yara Stormhold laughing as she died. About her faith that he would find a way. He thought about what she had said, that humans were always underestimated. I accept, he said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Korath seemed momentarily stunned by the response. You accept? The Admiral repeated. You, a creature I could crush with one hand, accept trial by combat against me. I carry the blade of Yara Stormhold. Jinho said. Her final wish was to see you face justice. He drew Kethvora and felt its warmth flood through him. I will not fail her. The sword began to glow, not just the faint shimmer of its symbols, but a true light, golden and fierce, pouring from the blade like liquid fire. The council members rose from their seats in shock. Verna's ancient face showed an expression Jinho could not read. The sword has chosen. She whispered, her voice carried through the sudden silence. It has not done that in 800 years. Korra's face twisted with something. That might have been fear before his arrogance smothered it. A trick, he spat. Some human technology hidden in the blade? You know better than that. Admiral, Vorna said. No power but the sword's own spirit can make it shine. She looked at Jinho with new eyes. It seems Commander Stormhold chose well. She raised her hand. The trial will take place tomorrow, at dawn in the arena of ancestors. Her gaze swept across this chamber. Let all who wish to witness come and see. She looked one last time at Jinho, and he thought he saw the ghost of a smile on her ancient face. Let them see what the blade has chosen. The council filed out, and guards came to escort Jinho to quarters where he would spend the night. As he walked past Korra, the Admiral leaned down until his face was level with Jinho's. Enjoy your last night of life, human, he hissed. Tomorrow I will show everyone what happens to insects who reach above their station. Jinho met his golden eyes without flinching. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I will show everyone what a dying warrior saw in me. He walked on, carrying the glowing sword of giants. And behind him Korra Stoneblood stood frozen with something cold growing in his chest. For the first time in his long career, the Admiral felt the unfamiliar sting of doubt. The 3 Valdrani interceptors broke through the dust clouds just as Jinho cleared the upper atmospheres. Salvage ship was never designed for combat, but it was built for speed in tight spaces. And he had modified the engines himself over 15 years of dangerous work. He pushed the persistent fool into a steep dive back toward the moon's surface. Using the dust storms as cover, the interceptors followed. Their weapons charging Jinho flew lower than any sane pilot would attempt, skimming the jagged peaks and diving through narrow canyons that forced the larger Valdrani ships to slow down or risk collision. One of them clipped a rock formation and spun out of control, crashing in a bloom of fire behind him. The other 2 kept coming. He led them through a maze of ancient volcanic tubes, his ship scraping against the walls more than once, until he found what he was looking for, a thermal vent. Superheated gas erupting from deep beneath the surface. He flew directly over it at full speed. Heat blooms scrambled their sensors for just a few seconds. But that was enough. By the time they reacquired his signal, he was already jumping to hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines around him. Only when the jump was complete did Jinho allow himself to breathe. The sword lay on the deck beside his chair, still pulsing with that strange warmth. Reached down to touch him and felt something push back against his mind. Not words exactly, but impressions, fury and determination and loss and pride. He saw flashes of battles fought centuries ago, felt the weight of enemies falling before his blade, experienced the fierce joy of victory and the cold acceptance of death. These were not his memories. You are showing me your past, he said aloud. The sword pulsed once, as if in confirmation. He understood then that Kethvara was more than a weapon. The Valdrani poured something of themselves into their ceremonial blades. Generations of warriors, leaving their marks on the Metal Era Stormhold, was part of it now. Her final moments of defiance and hope, added to the chorus of voices within Jinho, set a course for the nearest station where he could access secure communications. He needed information before he walked into the heart of Valdrani space, carrying their sacred steel. 3 hours later, the face of Dr. Moonsoyan appeared on his screen. She was a xenanthropologist who had spent 20 years studying Valdrani culture, and she was one of the few humans they actually respected. She was also his oldest friend, Jinho, she said, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in his appearance. You look terrible, and your ship looks worse. I need your help, he replied. I have a Valdrani ceremonial sword, And I need to know what happens to a human who carries one. Soin stared at him for a long moment. Please tell me you are joking. I am not. He held up Kethvora so she could see it through the camera. The symbols etched into the blade glowed faintly. And Soin's face went pale. Where did you get that? She whispered he told her everything, starting with the crash site and ending with his escape through the dust storm. Soin listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail when he finished. She was silent for nearly a minute. You are a dead man, she finally said, by Valdrani law. No outsider who touches a ceremonial blade can be allowed to live. There has to be an exception. Jinho said, the commander gave it to me willingly. And she charged me with a duty. Soin pulled up something on her terminal. Scrolling through dense text, there is one possibility, she said slowly. An ancient rite called the Burden of the Fallen. She read from the screen. If a warrior dies in battle and passes their blade to another before death, that person may carry the weapon until the fallen warrior's final wish is fulfilled. That is exactly what happened, Jinho said. Then technically, legally, you are now considered a Valdrani warrior by their oldest laws. Soin shook her head in disbelief. You have all the rights and responsibilities of anyone who carries a ceremonial blade, including the right to stand before the High Council and the right to challenge those who have wronged the blade's previous owner. Soin's eyes widened. Jinho. No. Kara Stoneblood murdered Commander Yara Stormhold and has been betraying his people to the Hollow Swarm for years. He gripped the sword tighter. The evidence is in this blade, and I intend to present it to the council. And if they do not believe you? Soin asked. If Korath demands trial by combat, as is his right when accused, then I will fight him. He is 3.5 meters tall, Soin said, her voice rising. He has killed champions from a dozen species, and he has been training for combat since before your grandparents were born. Then I will not fight fair. Jinho replied. Soin stared at him through the screen, and he could see her mind working. She knew him too well to think she could talk him out of this. Fine, she said at last. If you are determined to die gloriously, at least let me help you do it properly. She transmitted a data package to his ship. This contains everything I know about Valdrani combat styles, council protocols, and Korath Stoneblood specifically. She paused. He favors his left side due to an old wound, and he has a temper that makes him sloppy when provoked. Thank you. Soin, do not thank me, she said. I am helping you commit elaborate suicide. She leaned closer to the camera. But if any human could do this, it would be you. And I mean that. She cut the connection. Jinna spent the next several hours studying the file she had sent while the persistent fool traveled toward Valdrani space. He learned about their combat traditions, their honor codes, and the specific procedures for addressing the High Council. He learned about Admiral Korath Stoneblood, a decorated war hero with a reputation for ruthlessness, and a personal kill count in the hundreds. He learned about the Burden of the Fallen in greater detail, and discovered that it had not been invoked by a outsider in over 2,000 years. The last non-Valdrani to carry a ceremonial blade had been a Kreth warrior who died in the attempt to fulfill his duty. Jinho did not plan to follow that example. Sword pulsed beside him throughout his studies, occasionally sending him flashes of insight. It showed him how Yera would have held the blade, how she would have stood and moved in combat. It showed him the fury she felt toward the man who had betrayed everything she believed in. It showed him her laughter at the end, that joyful defiance in the face of death. You knew, he said to the sword. She knew this would happen, and she chose me anyway. The blade pulsed warmly in response. Jinho looked out at the stars streaming past his viewport and felt the weight of what he carried. Not just the sword and its memories, not just the evidence that could bring down an admiral. He carried the faith of a dying warrior. The hope that a small and fragile human could do what giants had failed to do, he would not let her down the Valdrani homeworld of Keth. Prime grew larger in his viewport as he dropped out of hyperspace. A dozen warships immediately moved to intercept him. Their weapons locked onto his tiny vessel. Jinho opened a channel and spoke the words that would change everything. I am Park Jinho of Earth, and I carry Kethvora, blade of Commander Yera Stormhold. He held the sword up to the camera, letting them see the glow of its symbols. I invoke the burden of the fallen and demand an audience with the High Council. There was a long silence. Then the warships parted before him, and a voice that shook with barely controlled anger gave him clearance to land. The giants were waiting. The dust storms of Kethra's 4 had been raging for 3 days when Park Jinho spotted the wreckage's salvage ship. The persistent fool picked up the signal through the static and interference that made this barren moon so dangerous for travelers. Most pilots avoided Kethra's 4 entirely, but Jinho had built his career on going where others refused to go. He brought his ship down through the swirling clouds of gray dust and landed near the crashed vessel. The ship was Valdrani, and that alone made him pause at the airlock. The Valdrani were giants among the stars, a warrior race that stood 12 feet tall and had never lost a war in 4,000 years of recorded history. Their ships were considered sacred property, and touching one without permission could result in death. But the emergency beacon was still pulsing, which meant someone inside might still be Alave. Jinho grabbed his medical kit and stepped out into the storm. The crash ship had torn a long scar across the rocky surface before coming to rest against a cliff face. Its hull was breached in multiple places, and smoke still rose from the engines. Found an opening large enough to squeeze through and activated his helmet lights inside. The destruction was severe. Collapsed bulkheads, shattered control panels, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. He followed the sound of labored breathing deeper into the bay. Ship. She was pinned beneath a section of the ceiling that had fallen during the crash. Even lying down and badly wounded, she was massive, her armored form stretching nearly the full length of the corridor. Her skin was the color of dark bronze, and her eyes, when they opened to look at him, were gold like twin suns. Blood pooled beneath her. Far too much blood for anyone to survive losing human, she said, and her voice was deep but weakened by pain. Jinho set down his medical kit and began assessing the situation. The metal pinning her weighed several tons at least, and even if he could move it, he could see the damage it had done. Her armor was crushed into her midsection, and the internal injuries would be catastrophic. I can try to get you free, he said. No, she replied, and one massive hand rose to stop him from approaching the debris. My wounds are beyond saving, little one, and there is no time for false hope. She coughed, and more blood came with it. I am Commander Yera Stormhold of the Valdrani 3rd Fleet, and I will die here on this worthless moon. Jinho knelt beside her head, feeling utterly useless. What happened to you, Commander? Betrayal, she said, and her golden eyes burned with fury even through the pain. My own admiral, Korath Stoneblood, has been selling our military positions to the Hollow Swarm for years. Jinho felt his blood run cold at that name. The Hollow Swarm was a parasitic collective that consumed entire civilizations, and they had been slowly advancing toward populated space for decades. I found proof, Yera continued. Recordings and transmissions that show his treachery beyond any doubt. She paused to breathe, each breath more difficult than the last. I tried to flee with the evidence, to bring it to the High Council, but Korath sent ships after me. She laughed then, a bitter sound that echoed through the ruined corridor. 3 interceptors against 1 scout vessel. And still I nearly escaped. Her hand moved to her side, where a massive sword hung from her belt. The weapon was nearly as long as Jinho was tall. its blade etched with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "This is Kethvora," she said, "the ceremonial blade of my family line. Carried by 17 generations of Stormhold warriors." She began to unbuckle the weapon from her belt. Her movements slow and painful. No non-Valdrani has ever wielded a ceremonial blade in 4,000 years of our history. Jinho watched her struggle with the buckles and moved to help her when his fingers touched the sheath. He felt something strange, like static electricity running up his arm. "Take my sword," Yara said, pressing the weapon into his hands, "and escape death." "I cannot leave you here," Jinho protested. "You cannot save me," she replied. And there was no anger in her voice, only certainty. "But you can avenge me." Human, she tapped the pommel of the sword with one finger. "The evidence is stored here." In a data crystal within the hilt, her golden eyes met his. And he saw something unexpected in them, not despair or fear, but hope. "Take this blade to the Valdrani High Council on Keth Prime." She grabbed his arm with sudden strength, pulling him closer. "Show them the truth, and let them see what their honored admiral has done." Outside, through the hull breaches, Jinho heard the distant whine of ship engines descending through the atmosphere. "They come," Yara said, releasing him. "Korath's hunters. Here to make sure I am truly dead and to destroy the evidence I carry." She pushed him back with one hand. "Go now." "Little human, while the storm still hides you." Jinho stood but did not move toward the exit. "Why me?" he asked. "Why trust a stranger with something so important?" Yara Stormhold looked at him for a long moment. And then she laughed. It was not the bitter laugh from before, but something genuine. Something that seemed to light up her dying features. "Because you are here," she said. When no one else came, she laughed again. Louder this time, because you tried to save a Valdrani when any sensible human would have fled. The engines outside grew louder. And Jinho knew he had only minutes before the pursuers landed. "Because you are small and fragile and utterly insignificant," Yara continued, her voice growing weaker. "And Korath will never see you coming." She closed her eyes, still smiling. "That is the human gift, is it not? You are always underestimated, and somehow you always survive." Jinho gripped the sword tightly and felt it pulse in his hands like a second heartbeat. "I will do this," he said. "I will bring your evidence to the council and see your admiral face justice." "I know you will," Yara whispered. Her breathing was shallow now. "Each inhale a struggle. The sword has already accepted you." "Little one." She opened her eyes one last time, and they were still burning gold. Still fierce despite everything. "It has not done that for an outsider in all our history." Her laughter came again, softer now. "Fading run, human, and carry my vengeance with you." Jinho ran. He squeezed back through the hull breach and sprinted across the rocky ground toward his ship. Dust storm swallowed him within seconds, hiding him from the 3 interceptors that were now descending toward the crash site. He reached the persistent fool and threw himself into the pilot's seat. Sword lay across his lap, impossibly heavy and warm against his legs as he lifted off and angled toward the storm clouds that would cover his escape. He heard something through the static of his radio. It was Yara Stormhold. Laughing, her life signs would have faded by now, he knew. But somehow her voice came through clear and strong. She was laughing as she died. And the sound was not sad or afraid. It was triumphant. Jinho pushed his ship higher into the atmosphere, clutching a sword that belonged to giants, carrying evidence that could topple an admiral, and wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into behind him on the surface of that barren moon. A Valdrani warrior breathed her last breath with laughter on her lips. She had chosen well, and she knew it. The human would not fail her.